Pat, we'll get you to stay and get inducted now, okay? Be redundant to go sit down and come back up. And for the past 20 years, these two right here have been like Simon and Garfunkel and Hall and Oates and Ruth and Gehrig and LaFleur and Schutt. They've been inseparable, a great duo up here for the past 20 years. So it seems only appropriate that tonight, to induct Patrick Joseph Connolly, we call on Dr. Sandy Young.
Nobody knows how Patrick Joseph Connolly could have driven himself as hard as he did and become as old as he has. He was born on March 27th, 1929, the third of 9 children born to Patrick and Ann Connolly. He inherited his love of sports from his father, a produce importer, and his uncle Gene. One article cited him as having said the following: "Sports in my life have superseded everything else, including school." It always seemed to me that the top priority in my life, and people kept telling me that if you didn't get away from that nonsense, I would amount to nothing. They were quite right, he says with a grin. As his fellow Cape Bretoners kept telling him, he wasn't worth a kick in the arse as an athlete. So he directed his interest into the management end of local hockey, baseball, and softball teams. The smartest thing he ever did was marry Betty. They're now Dartmouthians. Their son David is now a famous local lawyer. One of the biggest causes of provincial unemployment occurred by chance when Pat accompanied a friend who was going to an audition for a job at CJCB in Sydney. At 4:30, the station manager came out and said that there were only time for 3 more interviews. He named Pat's friend as one of the people to come up. His Pat friend said no, he'd had enough of that. He didn't think he had a chance. Pat took the interview, and that was 1948. He won. The boss said Pat was too young at that time, but came back to offer him the job. At 21, he became the play-by-play announcer for the most famous Nova Scotia hockey team in history, the Sydney Millionaires. They claimed the title because they were one of 3 Nova Scotian teams to challenge for the Stanley Cup before it became the trophy for the NHL. Pat Connolly, ladies and gentlemen, has done play-by-play in an estimated 3,500 broadcasts in Eastern, Western, and Central Canada in hockey, basketball, baseball, football, and boxing. In addition to taking the cream play-by-play jobs for decades, Pat Connolly has, in the course of his career, worked for 10 radio stations, 9 maritime newspapers, and has been the Nova Scotian correspondent for at least 5 U.S. major newspapers. The reason he's the best-known journalist in the Maritimes, nobody else could get a damn job. At 21 years old, he became famous among broadcasters when he was first accorded the very protected privilege of being the first announcer to broadcast from Foster Hewitts' private booth. The occasion was the playoff game between the Sydney Millionaires and the Toronto Marlboros. Pat once described the experience, and I quote, "I was told to meet Foster at the Gardens in Toronto on a Saturday afternoon to clear the way. What an experience that was. To get to the gondola, you had to venture up on the treacherous ramp, climb up a ladder attached to the side of the gondola, and then climb over beams to get to the booth. It was scary, to say the very least. He took me to the gondola and told me I could use his seat. I was told later by the garden staff it was a courtesy never before afforded a visiting broadcaster. All others had to do the game from outside the Foster's booth, and no one ever sat in his seat. Foster didn't come to the booth, but stood outside and listened to Connolly's call. Between periods, he made some suggestions. Pat recalls, and again I quote, "I was scared to death, and I should have been. It was a thing of dreams. A kid from Sydney River getting to work in the Taj Mahal of hockey was something one would fantasize about, but really could expect never to come true." In 1955, Connolly was the first ever sport host of CBC television in Halifax, and in 1959, he could make the same claim about CJCH television. Sports figures he's interviewed over the years have been many. Heavyweight boxing champions alone make a who's who. Jack Dempsey, Jack Sharkey, Joe Louis, Jersey Joe Walcott, Floyd Patterson, and Muhammad Ali. Pat Connolly, ladies and gentlemen, does his thing gratis at about 30 charitable functions a year. The Abilities Foundation, Big Brothers, Nova Scotia Tech, Brain Injury,
VG Foundation Literacy Golf Tournament, the IWK Children's Hospital, Food for Others of Dartmouth. And I have a page, and I'm not going to read them all, but take it for granted that they all are heavily laden as those. He's the best, he's on one of St. Mary's University Sports Hall of Fame committees, on their board of governors. He's on the Dartmouth Athletic Commission. He's the chairman of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame of the Selection Committee for 20 years and was the Nova Scotia Sport Volunteer of the Year in 1989. He served 14 years on Canada's Sports Hall of Fame Selection Committee and was selected to another board of governors in 1994. In April 1989, he was appointed Atlantic Regional Vice Chair for Canada's Sport Hall of Fame. He's a member of Seagram's National Selection Committee for Canadian Athletic Awards in the 1980s. Volunteers for the Nova Scotia Senior Olympics. He was honorary chairman, Halifax Dartmouth Big Brothers Big Sisters Bowl for Millions campaign in 1997. One time he took a couple of us down into Boston area. He wanted to show off his, as you know, Pat likes a good meal. But one of their specialties down there is a fish dish called scrod. It's a small haddock or cod that they serve whole. So we got out of the plane, we got in a taxi, and Pat said to the cab driver, can you tell us where to get scrod? The cab driver said, yeah, but I never heard it referred to in the past pluperfect subjunctive before. This is not the first attention Pat has received. He's been honored many and feted many times. In the 1975 CIAU Volunteer of the Year, recipient of the Robert G. Hayes Award for Services to St. Mary's University in 1990, Basketball Nova Scotia Merit in 1981, and at the Pat Connolly Appreciation Night same year. In December 1997, over 800 people attended the Pat Connolly Roast, the proceeds of which benefited the Nova Scotia Sport Heritage Centre and other charities. Tonight, we add to all this laudation by inducting the first television sports broadcaster in Atlantic Canada to the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, your friend and mine, Mr. Pat Connolly.
To make the presentation, can we have Ken Mounts, please, the president of the Halifax Mooseheads, to come forward, plus past chairs of the Hall of Fame, Dorothy Walker, Bill White, Tom Lynch, and Eleanor Norrie. The presentation to Pat Connolly. Now officially a member of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, Mr. Pat Connolly. So Dr. Young said that you were the first sportscaster ever at CBC TV in Halifax. Have there been any good ones since? One. Steve Armitage. All right.
Now, there's been a succession, Bruce, truth to tell, of great ones at CBHT. Not the least of which is my young friend from Chapel Street many years ago, Mr. Bruce Rainey.
Thank you, sir. We have talked a lot about Nova Scotia athletes and what makes them special. What qualities do most of these athletes possess that you just love?
About Nova Scotians? I think just being Nova Scotia, having the privilege of growing up in this province with the quality of life, the high standards that are set, the educational system, but the communication with the people and the simple way of life I think, is all conducive to turning out some of the great athletes that we have. And I guess there is such a rich heritage to uphold for those who follow that the standards are high, the bar has been set very high, and the athletes just seem to keep meeting it and exceeding it.
I asked you once what the greatest thing about your career has been, and you said not the money, not the notoriety, but the people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The people made it, made my life. Absolutely. There's no question about it. You know, when everything is stripped away, games are played, and there are winners and losers, but at the end of the day, they are still people. And, you know, the people who win with pride and lose with grace, and I guess that's part of the Nova Scotia heritage too.
Has the old adage, behind every great man stands a great woman, ever applied more to somebody than you?
I'm glad you brought that up, Bruce. You know, because very frankly, you know, well, you heard the things that have been perhaps done over the years, but it all requires time, and you have to steal that time from somebody. And I have been very, very fortunate to have had my family, particularly my wife Betty, who is, and let me assure you, the all-time Hall of Fame sports widow. And I'd like her to stand and recognize, and I'd like to share this with her tonight. And my son David and Allison, my daughter-in-law, and my entire extended family who are occupying that room, they're here from all over Canada and the United States. And that's a great thrill because I have had the benefit from day one of having this wonderful family to support me.
We're the better for it. Mr. Pat Connolly, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Bruce.